Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Ask Andrew Show, Canada's first Facebook live streaming family law question and answer show. My name is Andrew Feldstein, and I'm the principal of the Greater Toronto family law firm, Feldstein Family Law Group. Both myself and our entire team practice exclusively in the area of family law. And today our special guest is Vitali Rosen. He's a registered psychotherapist and registered marriage and family therapist. His private practice includes a number of counseling services, which includes couples therapy, premarital counseling, and psychotherapy. As an experienced marriage counselor, Vitali is here today to speak with us about marriage counseling and reconciliation. So without further ado, Vitali, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Now, I know some people might think it's a little odd for a family law lawyer to be having a show focused on reconciliation.
Yeah.
But the irony is there have been a number of times in my career where I've had clients and they talk to me about what the issues are that led to the breakdown of the marriage. And I try to steer them away from a divorce and to fixing their marriage first. And as I tell them, I'm only going to make things worse if they want to reconcile, not better. And if there's a real hope at reconciliation, someone like you stepping in and trying to save the family is obviously what's best for the client and what's best for that family.
Great.
So I was wondering, Vitali, I know I gave you an introduction, but can you tell us a little bit about your work as a marriage counselor and what inspired you to become a marriage counselor?
Yes, of course. Ever since when I was doing my undergraduate degree in psychology, I already knew I was going to become a psychotherapist. But at that time, I wasn't yet sure if I was going to be a generalist or a specialist. I was kind of hoping to work with individuals, couples, families, children, all of it. But by the end of my undergrad, I pretty much already knew that I wanted to specialize in working with couples. Mostly because of the complexity of the work. I was very passionate about relationships, and that led me to apply to a graduate degree at the University of Guelph, specifically couple and family therapy program. And I've been working with couples ever since. And like you said, I work on marriage counseling, premarital counseling. People come in with after an extramarital affair. There is reconciliation. There is also separation counseling sometimes as well.
Okay, so the thing that always struck me was I was talking to a marriage counselor probably 20 years ago about the whole concept of marriage counseling. And what that particular counselor said to me really resonated, which is every year we take our car in for a tune-up because we want our car to continue operating in a good condition for a long period of time. And if you take it in for a tune-up, the car will continue running. But yet when it comes to our marriages, which is probably the most or one of the most important things in our lives, we don't seem to do that. And marriage counseling is a form of a tune-up in a way.
I agree. And by the way, it's not the only way of tune-up. I would recommend like reading books, like watching shows and things like that. But I agree. Yes, marriage counseling is just one of the possible tune-ups. It's pretty much spending time on your relationship, yes.
And people seem to forget it, which ends up being good for my business, but unfortunate because it's a shame that people don't think to put the energy in when the times are good, which will lead to a better result rather than getting to a critical point in their relationship. Right. I wonder from your experience, when people are coming to you for marriage counseling, how often is it at a point where the marriage is teetering on the decision of can they save it or not?
Yes, unfortunately, quite often. On average, there's that statistic that an average couple waits about 6 years or so from the onset of their issues until they actually seek help. And that's what I'm seeing. Some couples are more proactive, of course, and that's good to see. But yes, a fair number of couples come in where we are talking mostly about saving the relationship as opposed to improving it. And yes.
And what do you think, I found I've never heard that statistic before, but it's interesting that people wait 6 years to deal with an issue.
On average, yeah.
And if that's the average, what's the likelihood of success then? And I know you can't say it with any statistics, but it's more anecdotal, but what's the likelihood of success when people don't wait the 6 years and come in when the issue arises and deal with the issue versus letting it percolate for 6 years?
Oh, I'll tell you the difference. When they come soon, there wasn't as much damage done. Obviously, they have their disagreements, but they can start working on them right away. They can start learning how to communicate. If they keep waiting, in addition to those primary issues that were there are some secondary issues that are on top of that. Let's say they cannot communicate well. As a result of that, they stop hanging out together as a couple, let's say. So there goes their time together, even when they're not arguing, because there's some underlying resentment that pushes them away. That overspills onto their passion that naturally may be declining anyway. So they're having less fun together. They're having less sex. So eventually it may lead to an extramarital affair, for instance. So by the time, let's say, a couple who waits for too long, by the time they come in, there is already a great deal of baggage, so to speak. So we're not just dealing with the original issues, we're also dealing with those secondary issues as a result of that. So that's what complicates things usually.
Probably makes it a lot more difficult for them to get back to where they want to get to.
Absolutely. Still possible most of the times, sometimes not, but yes, it does make it a little more difficult.
Now, one of the things that I see that you do is premarital counseling, and that's something we don't hear about often. How much of your practice is premarital counseling, and what does that entail?
Unfortunately, not a high percentage, to be honest. I would say, off top of my head, maybe 5 to 10% of all the couples I see, they come as premarital couples who specifically want to prepare for marriage. Most people somehow have this feeling of safety and security, I guess, that it's not going to happen to us. The statistics, they are for other people, so to speak. When people do come in, we talk about the issues they're already having in the relationship, and I try to prepare them for marriage. We discuss things like having children. Are they on the same page? How many children? How are they going to manage finances? Things like that. How are they going to deal with in-laws issues? So it's a little bit easier to work that way. I'll tell you though, there is one difference though. Premarital couples, even when they do come in, they're not always aware actually of what the real issues are and what they could be. There is a little bit of a benefit to couples who were married already and who come in. They can appreciate the complexity. They've already encountered real issues. Premarital couples, I'll tell you, they're a little bit there isn't as much, I don't want to say as much maturity kind of thing, but they haven't been exposed, so to speak, to the issues, and they don't always take them as seriously, I would say. It's still better to come in and work on the relationship, but I do get a sense of, they haven't been scared yet, so to speak. They haven't looked into the eye of the problem yet.
Well, sometimes the problem is they have a simple solution and think that they'll be able to work through it without realizing what challenges there will be in life that gets thrown at them, which is very different.
And it's a part of being young as well.
I totally get that. So what would you say are the main issues that you encounter as a marriage counselor?
I would say that the main issue that people bring to me is inability to resolve conflict. Sometimes it's very obvious. Some couples are volatile and the conflict is obvious. They just argue, they fight. In other situations, I see conflict avoiders. There is as much conflict in the marriage. However, they avoid engaging, so to speak. So when they come in, let's say 6 years down the road or so, they present very differently. They say, we don't fight, we don't have problems. The only problem we have is we're more like roommates, let's say. There is no intimacy in the relationship. So what we need to work on is actually bring some of the conflict out and help them communicate better. I'll tell you most common sources of conflict in relationships that people bring. It's disagreements over finances, a big one, actually huge. Disagreements over parenting. Sometimes, the partners, they undermine each other as parents. They're not being a united front with the children. Issues with in-laws, sexual concerns for couples. And also things like disagreements over chores or how to spend time together, like leisure, recreation. Those are the sources of conflict. And I would say a special case, so to speak, that I often see is probably about, I would say 25% of my practice is the aftermath of an extramarital affair. I mean, nothing will bring you as close to separation as a discovery of an affair. Sometimes the separation is instantaneous on the spot. You know, the person who had the affair, they're asked to move out immediately, and they come to see me for living in a hotel, let's say, or staying with relatives or friends. And then we start the process of working towards reconciliation. Either they come alone or hopefully with their partner, but that's the work. So those are the main issues that I would say that I encounter.
So there's two things that makes me think about. I think of how many times, and I'm going to be a little gender specific here because I find it usually works out this way. I've had male clients come into my office and they say, my wife told me that she wants to end the marriage. I don't know why. We never fought, and I didn't know that she was unhappy. I mean, I assume you probably hear that one a lot as well. And that to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, sounds like they were probably trying to have conflict avoidance because they say, we never yelled, we didn't fight.
Yes. Either that, or let's say he was more conflict avoidant. Maybe she tried to communicate. Maybe she was kind of nagging, trying, and then she stopped and she simply pulled back. And as a result, the issue is swept under the rug, but basically she probably stopped communicating because she probably expected that there would be either an escalation from him or that he would minimize, that he would kind of dismiss her concerns. And that's how he would avoid conflict in that situation. Of course, the problem is like it's swept under the rug. And you know what? It actually works for a while, for many years. But the problem is after several years, the rug is getting fuller, the rug is getting bumpier. And that's when they start kind of feeling the issues. And then let's say the wife may say, I've had enough. I actually want to leave you. And he's surprised, of course, because he thought, well, she stopped complaining. She must be a happy camper. But of course, she's not.
So then my question is, because I think of how many times I've heard that similar story, either from the husband's perspective or the wife's perspective, who you basically just described, and saying, I'm just miserable. I can't take this marriage anymore, and they want out. And when I hear that story, what would be your suggestion for people who are watching this who may be saying, oh, that sounds like me? Like, how should they recognize that this is the unhealthy dynamic that they've fallen into in their marriage? And what do they do to get out of it?
Yes. Well, I'll tell you, to recognize that dynamic, it's very simple. Like, they should think about them being in the beginning of their relationship. Chances are during that more or less honeymoon stage, they were well connected with each other. There was more intimacy. The husband may think, is my wife kind of the same, or is she very different? Is the smile on her face is not as wide when she sees me? How is she interacting with me? That should be a clue for him. Is she happy in the relationship or not? For the wife too, she should be conscious about how she communicates about that. If she actually kind of either escalates when she tries to talk to him, if she blames him and he feels blamed, there's this common pursue, withdraw cycle or blame, defend cycle where, let's say, the wife may be blaming the husband. Obviously, she's only trying to communicate. She's desperately trying to reconnect with him, but he may feel it like an attack, basically, and he may pull back, and there goes their cycle. She blames, he withdraws. So they need to understand that this cycle is happening. It's not the same as it used to be. And then my recommendation is they should try and sit down and talk with each other, being as direct as possible, as respectful as possible, and avoid escalating, avoid minimizing the issue. And if it doesn't work, well, then I would say hire someone to help, seek counseling.
Well, the comment I'm going to give about the seeking counseling is I look at it this way. The counselor's hourly rates is going to be nominal in comparison to the upheaval that it's going to create both financially and emotionally for the family. And when I say the family, I mean for both spouses and their kids. So be very cognizant that it can be a really good idea if you need help to go get it. And I would say what I'm hearing from you about people is it's an easy dynamic, but you said, look and see at the reaction of the spouse. I tend to think a lot of people, especially when they have younger children, they're more or less in an exhaustion stage. And both of them, that is, they go to work, they come home, they take care of little kids in the evenings and weekends, and they're not looking at smiles with anybody other than a few smiles that they get with their kids when they're excited over something, because they're just, it's an exhausting stage of life.
Yes.
And how does that person recognize that, well, my spouse isn't happy beyond the I'm just exhausted stage?
Yeah. But I think the first thing they actually need to recognize is that they put too many eggs in the basket of the work and in the basket of the family with the children, and that they've been ignoring the couple basket kind of thing, you know, or if you think of like three baskets or three buckets, so to speak, you know, there is the individual bucket in life, there is the couple bucket, and there is the family bucket, you know. Initially, when people are not even married or in a relationship, their individual bucket is full, you know, they work, they go out, they socialize with friends, then they start dating. It's all the couple bucket suddenly, right? Even friends, they start complaining. They start, okay, you've disappeared, you know? And it's true. Their individual bucket is now low. They're all into the couple. But then they get married. They start having a family. Unfortunately, what happens is it becomes like almost 100% family bucket. Everything they do with kids, and they work too much. They work for the family. And the couple bucket goes to zero. So my first suggestion would be start paying attention to how much time do we spend together as a couple, not talking about the kids, without the actual kids, because if you do, that's a +1 into your family bucket. That's a 0 towards your couple bucket. Let's say going out, going to the movies with the kids. I'd say go to the movies together first, like go have dinner. But don't talk about the children, talk about each other, like talk about, basically become a boyfriend girlfriend again, you know. Just because you're a husband and wife doesn't mean that the whole boyfriend girlfriend subunit needs to disappear, but unfortunately it does. So I think once that happens, it's almost impossible not to notice that let's say your girlfriend slash wife is different, or that your boyfriend slash husband is different.
Well, I think what you're bringing to light, to me at least when I hear this, is that you should really need to make time for the couple, whether it's going out for dinner or a movie or doing something for the two of you. And I would assume, when we talked earlier about what are the trouble signs that you may see in a relationship, is that when you're trying to invest that time, as you put it, to put time in the bucket for the couple, and your spouse or partner is not receptive to that, those are probably warning signals that you got a problem.
Absolutely. And they need to realize that time in the energy into the couple bucket, it can only come either from the individual bucket or from the family bucket. And, you know, so it will not come out from outer space kind of thing. I think that's where people get stuck. They start feeling guilty, let's say, oh, what do you mean we're going to go out without the children and leaving the kids with babysitters or parents? What do you mean we're going to go to Cuba or Mexico just without the kids? But, you know, I think they need to get over that guilt.
Well, one of the things I've said to people before, I'd rather see children have a bad weekend with babysitters and have their parents stay together than have every weekend being a great weekend with the parents, then having the parents split up.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Obviously.
I'm seeing a question from the viewers. It says, how many sessions do the average couple spend for counseling? So I'm assuming that's a question for me, correct?
That is for you.
Okay, so I mean, it really depends on the counselor. You know, couples counseling is not as regulated as some other professions. When I work with a couple, I would say that by session 3, 4, they should start, like you as a couple, you should start seeing some sort of a linear progress, you know, because if by session 4 or 5, if we're going in circles, I can almost guarantee you that by session 15, we'll still be going in circles. Kind of makes no sense to continue. You know, you probably need to find a different counselor with a different approach. However, if things are going well and, you know, we're not going in circles, there is linear motion, but some things still need to be processed, then I would say on average, anywhere between 5 to 10 sessions, you know, but again, you shouldn't get to session 10 going in circles and then be surprised kind of thing. So that's the average. You know, some couples, they're so natural, so to speak, they pick up the tools and by session 4 or 5, they're flying, they don't need me anymore. Other couples, there are some underlying issues that need to be processed. That's when it gets to session kind of 10 or so.
Well, it's interesting because I think different couples pick up on different things, and some people hear what they want to hear and other people don't. But what would you say overall are the benefits of seeing a marriage counselor, either on an individual or with I think we're having problems with our audio right now. If you can just bear with us. Vitali, are you able to hear me clearly? Okay, I apologize to our viewers. There's certainly a problem. I'm not sure. I see our producer is trying to work on it right now. Okay, I'm hoping that we've now resolved our technical issues, and I apologize. But it does not appear to be working. Vitali, are you able to hear me? It sounds like we're having some technical issues that are rather challenging. We are close to the scheduled end time of the show, and I'm hoping our viewers can hear us clearly. Okay, I know I've apologized. It's unfortunate because it's an interesting conversation that we're having with Vitali right now about counseling and the timing of it, because I think there's a lot for people to learn if they're on the edge about when is the right time, recognizing issues and trying to save their marriages in that fashion. It would appear that we've lost the audio for Vitali. And if that's the case, I wanted to say a few words before we would wrap up the show. Then we may have to wrap it up early since we've lost our guest. But what I'm really focused on is, as some of the viewers may know, I'm someone who has lived through divorce, and it is not a pretty thing. It is not a good thing. It is very hard on the children. It is very hard on the parties. And if there is a chance that you can save your marriage by virtue of going and doing the work, then do it. And if you recognize that some of the problems that we've discussed during the show with Vitali are going on in your marriage, again, go do it. And as I said at the outset of this episode, it may seem surprising that here's a divorce lawyer who makes a living from couples breaking up, trying to suggest that people should save their marriages, because that is important. We have so many kids that are growing up now that are children of divorce. And if we can avoid some misunderstandings and miscommunication between parties and recognize these problems early on, and resolve the disputes and work on the problems, the kids are far better off. And it's like I said before, I've said to many people, it is much smarter to give it when you're feeling guilty about spending time investing it in the marriage and you feel guilty that you're not with your kids. Better to give your kids a bad weekend with the grandparents that you think isn't as exciting as you would have given, but you and your spouse get that chance to go off and be a couple and not mom and dad, and have a positive marriage and a good marriage that will last, far outweighs giving the kids that boring weekend. And don't feel that you're being selfish or a bad parent or full of guilt, because focusing on each other will make it a better, not only a better marriage and therefore your kids coming from an intact family, but also teaching your children what a good relationship looks like. And that's an important role model and a good lesson for children. Now, I know it's only 1:25, but seeing that we lost our guest, I think it probably would make sense for us to end the show slightly early. My apologies to our viewers. I did want to thank Vitali for being on the show today. It was a pleasure having him. And I have to say, I learned a lot in terms of the dynamics of certain points that I didn't appreciate before. And I did find that very interesting, and I enjoyed that experience. If you want to learn more about Vitali's counseling, he can be viewed on his website, which is www.rosencounselling.ca. The next Ask Andrew show is on April 20th at 1 p.m. If you have any requests or ideas for future shows, then please email them to us at info@feldsteinfamilylaw.com. And thank you for watching.